Optimal minimalism.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
Me, Tim, Ferriss, Show.
This episode is brought to you by Peloton, which I've been using probably for about a year now. Peloton is a cutting-edge indoor cycling bike that brings live studio classes right into your home. You can also do on-demand, which is what I do. We'll come back to that. So you don't have to worry about fitting classes into a busy schedule or making it to a studio or gym with a hectic or unpredictable commute. I, for instance, have a Peloton bike right in my master bedroom at home, and it's one of the first things I do many mornings. I wake up, I meditate for a bit, then I knock out a short 20-minute ride in my undies. Hard to do that at the gym. Take a shower, and I'm in higher gear for the rest of the day. It's really convenient and has become something that I look forward to. So you have a lot of options. For one, if you like, you can ride live with thousands of other riders across the country on an interactive leaderboard to keep you motivated. There are also up to 14 new classes added every day with more than 8,000 classes on demand, and you can pick based on length, 45 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, music, hip hop, rock and roll, or say low impact versus high intensity or interval. You can pick the class structure and style that works for you. And in my case, I quite like Matt Wilper's, and I tend to do on-demand and listen to a lot of and watch many of the same classes over and over, but I'm kind of promiscuous and also enjoy classes from a lot of the other instructors. They have, Peloton, an amazing roster of incredible instructors in New York City with a whole range of styles and personalities, so you can find what you're in the mood for. You also get real-time metrics that you can use to track your performance over time, and that will help, I would say, catalyze you to beat your personal best. Now, that all sounds good, right? Gamification, yada, yada, yada. I didn't think that it would work for me or in any way incentivize me, but they really 100% hit the nail on the head. I was very, very impressed with how motivating it was. And it worked tremendously to keep me pushing, which quite honestly takes a fair amount. I can get quite lazy, particularly with anything that edges on endurance, which is kind of more than 5 reps of anything for me. So check it out. Discover this cutting-edge indoor cycling bike that brings the studio experience right to your home. Peloton is offering listeners of this podcast a limited time offer. Go to onepeloton.com. That's O-N-E, Peloton, Peloton.com, and enter the code TIM, all caps, at checkout and get $100 off of accessories with your Peloton bike purchase. So get a great workout at home anytime you want. Check it out. Go to onepeloton.com and use the code TIM to get started. This episode is brought to you by LegalZoom, which more than 2 million Americans have used to help start their businesses. Past guests even, such as, WordPress lead developer, CEO of Automatic, Matt Mullenweg, now valued at more than $1 billion, have used LegalZoom to help with their business needs, specifically in his case to form his company. But LegalZoom isn't just for launching your business. Their services include everything from helping you to manage changing tax laws, reviewing contracts, creating NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, important stuff, handling lease agreements, and assisting with really any other legal challenge, hurdle, inconvenience that typically takes time and effort away from running your business. The best part is that you won't get charged by the hour because LegalZoom isn't a law firm, so they won't be running the clock up and spinning circles just to raise your bill. Instead, they just ask you to pay one low upfront price for whatever it is that you're looking to get, a la carte style. So visit LegalZoom.com and check out their business section for all of their services. And if you want special savings, that's the terminology in the copy that they suggest. I don't know what the special savings is, folks, but it's titillating. If you want special savings, enter promo code TIM, T-I-M, at checkout, capital T, lowercase I-M. Again, take a peek, LegalZoom.com, and enter promo code TIM. Hello, boys and girls, ladies and germs. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, where it is my job each and every episode to deconstruct a world-class performer from any number of different domains: business, sports, entertainment, military, and so on. And today's guest, who will perhaps debate that he himself is world-class, but I will not allow it, is Tobi Lütke. who is the founder and chief executive officer of Shopify, CEO, that is, of Shopify. In 2004, Tobi began building software to launch an online snowboard store called Snowdevil. It quickly became obvious that the software was more valuable than the snowboards, so Tobi and his founding team launched the Shopify platform in 2006. He has served as CEO since 2008 at the company headquarters in the metropolitan epicenter of tech, Ottawa, Canada. It's a fantastic place. I've spent time there. Beaver Tails, also incredible. Tobi is an active advocate for computer literacy and education and serves as a board member of Canada Learning Code, all caps CLC, Canada Learning Code, an organization working to give all Canadians access to digital skills. In 2014, Tobi was named the Globe and Mail's CEO of the Year. He served as chair of the Digital Industries Table, an advisory board commissioned by the federal government to provide recommendations on how to turn Canada into a digital leader. And that report was published, that is, of the table, in September 2018. Tobi, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And I feel like this is a long time coming. We go way, way back, and we'll get to that. But I thought we could start with your penchant related to optimization. So I want to do a quick fact check here. So this is something I came across in the New York Times. It doesn't surprise me, but here's how it goes. I also have a weird obsession with optimizing things. This is supposedly a quote of yours. Even when I was walking to elementary school, I counted the number of steps on different routes so I could figure out which one was shortest. And I'll just finish this up. So I'll just connect some things. If I had to do something once, that's fine. If I had to do it twice, I'm kind of annoyed. And if I had to do it 3 times, I'm going to try to automate it. Did you count steps?
I did. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? It's one of those situations, like where I think I was together with my mom, my sister, and my sister was complaining about me trying to optimize something. I think we were talking about going for a walk, and I'm like, well, if a place we're starting from is the same as a destination, why don't we just not go? And my mom immediately said, "You realize you did this from when you were like 4 or something," and told me the story, and it kind of sort of, unfortunately, probably tells people way too much about me. So I don't know why this made it into the New York Times. I'm actually kind of unhappy about this right now, but here we are.
And here we are. And the optimization or the looking for efficiency, is that something that your either of your parents has, or did that seem to kind of come out of left field?
I think, I don't know. It's probably one of those unexplained kind of quirks, which after probably many, many years where it's annoying everyone around me, suddenly starts becoming useful, right? Like after, because, especially as a programmer, it's been wonderful, right? It's, I love these old machines where, can understand every chip that's in the machine. You can kind of figure out what's what, try to, make a video game in the 90s was really, really hard. And so those were kind of things which really, really attracted me.
Mm-hmm. And so just to give people a snapshot of where things are now, and we're going to certainly continue with this retrospective rewinding the clock, but how big is Shopify at the moment?
Yeah.
What are some of the numbers?
So, as you said, Shopify started in 2004 and it became sort of, we released it in 2006, which again, that's almost like 100 internet years ago, right? It's been a long time. And the company now is a public company. It's about 4,500 people work at Shopify. We have offices in largely across Canada, but also in Berlin and Australia and so on, and all sorts of other places. We have about I don't know what our newest official number is. I think it's called more than 700,000 customers, and are all around the world, 175 countries, and so on, and so on, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So it's become this, by almost any metric, fantastic success. I was mentioning when we were having lunch before this that I was unpacking some boxes that I'd not yet unpacked from my move from San Francisco to Austin, and I found the coin from the initial public offering. And it really made me smile because I remember when we first met, Shopify had, what would you say?
15 people.
15 people. And that was that 2008 or 2009?
2008, I
It was
think.
2008.
Yeah.
And Could you tell what you remember of that first meeting? Where did we first meet?
We met at a conference called RubyConf, right? Or might have been RailsConf. Yeah.
RailsConf.
RailsConf, that sounds right. Rails, Ruby and Rails being the technology Shopify has been programmed in, and you were invited as a keynote speaker. I think you did an interview with David.
That's right.
And
David Hannemeyer Hansen.
Exactly. So I think we talked in the green room. It's like, hey, I love everything about your book, but the worst part about it is you keep talking about using Yahoo stores for your supplement business, and you really should have used Shopify. And what can I do to convince you of? I wasn't that direct. I was probably really shy.
But the timing was perfect also because I was in the process of doing the final editing for the revised edition of the 4-Hour Workweek, and I had been polling my readers through social media and the blog and so on, which had at that time, the blog already at that point had millions of readers, and asking for suggestions for updates for the tools and resources. And Shopify was the most consistent recommendation for e-commerce platform. And then I go to this conference. We meet in the speaker's room. Effectively, you have let's say 15 or so employees, and that was the beginning of our exchanges and then collaboration, which we'll get into. But it on one hand seems like a previous lifetime, and on another hand, just does not seem that long ago.
It doesn't, does it?
And I have to say, for people who perhaps wonder this, does money change people? I have to say, it's been so. I didn't expect you to change, and you didn't. And it's really refreshing. And I don't know if I've said this publicly, but Shopify is one of those companies where everyone I've ever been involved with has been just such a genuinely good person. It's an example of when the good guys have won in a way. And it just makes me so happy that you guys have had the outcomes that you've had. So
thank you so much for that, Tim.
Yeah, I just want to start there. It's really just, it gives me so much joy to think about. And let's get back to your odd behavior as a kid. So this is from a separate piece, and this isn't going to be all quotes, but some of these are just so fantastic. I can't not mention. This is from Globe and Mail, and this I think speaks to a superpower of yours that may have caused problems in the beginning. And I recall reading a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but Francis Ford Coppola, the director, incredible, legendary filmmaker, had said, you receive Lifetime Achievement Awards for the things that would have gotten you fired in the beginning. and
that's fantastic quote.
Yeah, so here's the quote, and this is the writer. From an early age, Lütke had what he calls authority problems. In schools in Koblenz, Germany, he preferred to deconstruct the questions teachers gave him rather than deliver the expected answers. And I was like, yep, that sounds right. He took shortcuts, determining the minimum number of hours he needed to spend in a particular class and still pass so that he could spend most of his time with his computer. One of the patterns that I have observed with you over the years that I think is so, so valuable and so simultaneously important but undervalued or underdiscussed is not just asking the question in front of you, but dissecting it to determine if it's the right question. So could you elaborate a bit on that, or think of any examples that could serve as a launching off point, or even maybe start with why you do this?
Yeah, wow, this is already going into interesting places, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, okay, we are talking about my authority problem and my obsession with optimization. So where do we go from here? Here's one thing, which is, here's what the authority problem thing has morphed into. And I think this is exactly the sort of pivot point from which it went from problematic to very useful. And that is, I have a serious problem just of accepting orthodoxy. Like the here's how things are done. Yep. Just kind of, that doesn't grab me in any particular way. And so what I've sort of determined for myself is I really want to understand the situation and the various pressures acting on the situation that I might get myself into. So you were taking us back with a little coin that you found, which is one of those artifacts the New York Stock Exchange gives you when you take a company public. And so we got to do this together. Before that date, when you actually ring the bell, you, at least traditionally, like companies like Spotify and Slack are now doing the direct listing, which I think is really, really healthy for that particular industry. But before that, you worked with bankers, you built this prospectus, and then and when you go on a roadshow and all these kind of things, you spend a grueling, talk about, I don't want to do a thing 2 times, 3 times. I had to give the same presentation 103 times in 8 days. It's absolutely, it was a complete haze.
Tobi's version of hell.
It was my version of hell, which is funny because my business partner Harley is the opposite of me and loved it, right? So it's good to have these people around who can remind
Side note,
you.
so Harley, probably the person I've heard most described as a force of nature. Yeah, that phrase applied to Harley.
Exactly, which I'm decidedly not. So Harley loved it. I wanted to automate it all the way through. But I'm taking us back there because I think it's a good example of this kind of thinking. One thing I did very early in the process of actually taking the company public was to not just understand how could Shopify become a good public company, but there was this sort of obvious agency problem that exists on the investment banker side, right? And so I spent a good couple months talking to people, figuring out what kind of things happen in the performance review of investment bankers. How do they make their money? How do they make their bonuses? How do they, how do they string together a career? What's good? What's bad? If they get a lot of these kind of fees, is that good for them or is that neutral? If they, because this is I would like to come to a conclusion, and often this is the same conclusion that orthodoxy would have just sent me to. Myself, because I want to say, okay, I'm going to do these following things because I from first principle argued that this is the right thing to do. And I think this more often than not actually leads to very interesting insights where you can say, okay, because I understand what's at play here, I can disagree with someone's suggestion and I can maybe improve something slightly. And I think in an interesting way, Shopify is a very long exercise in doing this over and over and over again, rather than saying, okay, well, the internet needs online stores. They are super important. Entrepreneurship is one of the biggest economic opportunities. Online retail is one of the biggest entrepreneurial opportunities of our lifetime. It's $1.9 trillion industry now. It's going to be $4 trillion soon. Online stores need to be something that people can create. Okay, cool. But do people really care about online stores? They care about selling, right? They care about becoming successful entrepreneurs. They care about reaching for independence and the success of that. So which pretty quickly sent us into a direction saying, okay, well, we do the online store thing, but let's actually build the software that actually supports people in the activity of reaching for independence. And because of this, it became something else, and success came through that.
Well, this also, in a way, connects some dots from earlier today when we were chatting about a mutual friend, Seth Godin.
Yeah.
And Seth and I, not too long ago, had this conversation where he gave the example of, which was borrowed from an example he had read, but he elaborated on it, which was, no one wants a 1/4-inch drill bit. They want a 1/4-inch hole. And then it's no, but they don't really want a 1/4-inch hole. They want a shelf. They don't really want a shelf. They want a place to put their books and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So that you don't sort of mistake the current characteristics of a temporary solution as the ultimate objective.
Because the world has sort of sorted itself into solutions based on a world that's long gone, in a way. Why? I mean, just looking back at my industry, why was there a online store industry and a point of sale system industry and all these eBay power seller tools. Like each of those instances, someone has a product and wants to sell it through whatever channel. Like, do you want to go to like 3, 4, 5 different vendors to get software to participate in all these channels? No, you would just want to do it, right? And so I think it's really worth going through life and just saying, well, hold on a second, like, what are people actually trying to accomplish? What is the actual problem here? I think the most impressive story along those lines that I've ever sort of come across is are you familiar with Malcolm McLean's story around the invention of a shipping container?
I'm not, but I've had a book about shipping containers recommended to me multiple times.
Probably.
The Box.
Yeah.
What was the name? The person's name you said?
His name was Malcolm McLean. He's one of those entrepreneurs who would absolutely be on your podcast if he would be alive right now, right? Because spent the first money out of college on buying a truck, started a trucking company, and tried to get things shipped across the country or even to Europe, and realized, like, we can make the most efficient trucking system, or the train guys have the most efficient trains, and the boat guys have ships all over the world. But getting something through multiple stations is impossible. Like, you have to unload everything, load in the next. So he ended up just buying a bunch of tankers from the US Navy, which had surplus tankers at the end of World War II, and just came up with this idea of putting a shipping container together, which you can put things in a factory in Maine and then ship them all the way to Berlin. And the moment he did that, the cost of sending like a unit of good went from, I think, $6 to 16 cents.
It's incredible.
We all live in Malcolm's world because the shipping container has been hugely influential in history. It's like a lot of people talk about free trade agreements and globalization. In reality, it's globalization happens the moment a shipping container opens in a country, and it's a fascinating, rather underexposed story. But what's so cool about this is the reason why he pulled this off is because again, the Vanderbilts and the train guys really loved their trains, and the boat guys loved boats. And he was the only person who just cared about moving things. He wanted to solve a problem of moving things in the world, and then you come to better solutions. And we need more of that kind of thing.
Yeah, the versatility. I don't want to get too taken off track, but the shipping container. When I was the brilliance of the modular design and the ability to take a single container and move it across different means of transport is an endlessly fascinating topic. And a lot of folks also don't realize the sort of genius of the design of shipping containers and the considerations of the dimensions and the ability to cool or control temperature. And then the entire aftermarket use of shipping containers also, which is how I came into it. I kind of backed into it looking at different types of design and construction. That book was called The Box.
Yes.
The Box. So since we're talking about it, might as well just hit on something I was going to ask about anyway, which is books. So you're I would say a voracious but very selective consumer of information, and there's a lot of garbage out there. You mentioned The Box. There's another book, and I think it might have been in Harley's office where I first saw it at Shopify, but High Output Management by Andy Grove.
That's one of the best books ever.
One of the best books ever. So I want to, and then another one that I have listed here is Drive by Daniel Pink. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that, but could you mention a few books that you have found particularly helpful, and maybe start with High Output Management and why that is a good book?
So I'll take you back sort of to early days. I started at Shopify as, hey, I only want to do the technology. I'm a programmer by trade, right? So this is my world. And I wanted to treat business as a black box for the first couple of years. And then for various reasons, I was sort of thrust into also having to take over the business side of Shopify. Around that time, actually, we met. And I did a poll with people I knew for 2 books to read. because
So
I wanted
business folks.
Exactly. So because up until this point, I was knee deep in Martin Fowler and Ken Beck and all these kind of luminaries of a programming world, but I had no idea about business. And so, but two books I read, which is funny because it tells you how good that selection process was, because I still think was they would rank in the top 5 books I've ever read. And I had a completely wrong view about how good business books were afterwards. Were High Output Management by Andy Grove and Influence by
Cialdini.
Cialdini, exactly. So that was a very fortuitous 2 first books to read.
Yeah, you got off to a good start.
Yeah. So Andy's book is unapologetically almost a how-to manual that kind of deconstructs the world of business into first principles. It's like, here's what matters. Here's how to think about it. No one needs a degree. There's a little bit of circumstantial, contextual understanding that you just have to have. But basically, it basically at the end of the day, making a business is an engineering exercise, and which is brilliant for me because that's like that actually connected. That made the whole thing about becoming a CEO significantly less scary to me because, engineering, I understand. And then Influence was just the most mind-bending book you can imagine because it essentially told you all the ways humans are flawed and influential and how, yes, computers are predictable and you can deal with it, but then once you make things for people, you need to go into storytelling and framing matters, which were also news to me, frankly. I spent my teens with computers, not with people. So I came as my wife would dine out on this topic and just probably make fun of me for hours, but like she always says I'm an immigrant to the human condition. So those two send me off to a good start. I just want to say though, voracious reader, voracious,
yeah.
Voracious. That's how you say that. I'm dyslexic. I actually read very slowly. I sort of overcome dyslexia, but like I read books very slowly. I think it's actually an advantage, frankly. I have very high recollection, but because of this, I have to be very selective on the books I read. So I'm not one of those 100 books a year kind of people.
Yeah. How do you choose books now? Or maybe as an example, like The Box. Why did that come on your radar? How did that make the cut?
The box came because I usually have a topic and then just dive, right? Like I dive into it. Like in this case, I was like, hey, I'm running Shopify. Shopify causes, billions, like tens of billions of dollars of commerce activity, and most of this is going to go through a logistics network that I don't understand. And I feel my job as a CEO is to have a most full stack understanding of every component in the that's at all related, which is frankly, given that we are working here in world trade, is almost the entire human condition. So it's an endless source of interesting deep dives into topics. But in this case, I was more about the logistics world. Like it's a fascinating world because it's been built for millennia, and like the Silk Road has still impact on the way the world economy works today, and stitching these things together is absolutely fascinating. But just even in the sort of first, okay, let me start digging, it became pretty clear that there was a history before the shipping container and a history after the shipping container. And if in these situations, when there's a specific date where everything changes, like the Industrial Revolution or something, be another example of that, what I tend to like doing is I like to find the players, like the people who had a lot of input on this kind of thing, or just at least who had the front row seat, and then read their biographies, because they don't tend to try to sell you anything other than that this person played an important role, but they tend to be the most credible witnesses to the actual outside events without so much bias towards convincing you that it was good or bad. And so in this particular case, it was very easy. There was actually a perfectly good book about exactly the guy who came up with it, and so it was an obvious choice.
What other actually, before we get to subjects and more books, because this may bridge over to something that I did not know. I feel like I should have known this, and it makes perfect sense, but I did not know this. So this is, I suppose, one of your problem domains. We can discuss what that means. When you became CEO, and I have a question about that also, but this is a quote from a media piece, and I could try to paraphrase it, but it'll take a lot longer. So you, as part of, here's the piece, as part of his self-directed crash course, he decided to fly to Silicon Valley. Now I'm going to pause here for a second because people listening might think, of course, you go to Silicon Valley to learn from fantastic entrepreneurs and so on, but it takes a different turn here, which I think is really indicative of how you're thinking, how you apply very structured thinking to things. Back to the piece. He set up meetings with venture capitalists and listened to their questions about Shopify's attrition rates and conversion rates and funnel, in parentheses, the various means by which a company attracts the attention and secures the commitment of new customers. It's a long way to say that. He had no idea what they were talking about, but he wrote down the terms. And then he went back to the hostel he was staying in and looked, that also tells you something, hostel he was staying in, and looked up everything on Wikipedia. He would then read up on how to calculate contribution margin ratio and the amount by which sales exceed variable production costs, then go to Shopify's database and get the numbers. Oh, he'd think that's an interesting way to look at the business. And then at the next meeting, he was able to answer one more question. This is a really clever way to go about
Thank you.
getting up to
fix that time.
I mean, you're learning by observing the questions and then defining the terms.
See, this is why I love podcasts. But my favorite thing in the world is books are definitely rank up there, but there's one thing which is better, which is being a fly in a wall when two experts talk amongst each other, right? Which is one of those situations that was almost impossible to line up as an outsider, and now suddenly is completely democratized through the wonderful invention of podcasting. But back then, and before that, I sometimes managed to do it via finding a chat room or a forum where experts talked amongst each other. It's something I was always seeking in this case. So when I was trying to learn about some technology, like some esoteric 3D rendering algorithms that I found interesting, I used to try to find where people talk about optimizing these things, and then I just don't understand anything that they're talking about, but then I chip away at it, and I would come into the knowledge. And so I tried to replicate this, and talking to venture capitalists ended up being sort of a way I figured out how to potentially do it. Because again, I had no background in business. I had no idea how this all worked. I had to do it fast because 2008, Shopify wasn't doing it well, right? It was very, very tough to keep the company alive.
So let's this is maybe a good opportunity to explain to people why you took over as CEO. Just the circumstances.
Yeah. But the circumstance was simple and probably fairly common. It's I had a co-founder for Snowdevil, which was a snowboard store, and we did I did the technology. He ran the store, and did a million other things like find us an office at some point and so on. But as the company pivoted much more to being a software company and started growing and requiring more and more people, at some point, it was just a different situation. And so he sort of came to me and decided that he wanted to transition out. And that really, that was very surprising because, again, I really wanted to treat business as a black box. I thought business it was a programmer. We don't like business.
I was going to say treating it as a black box is a very diplomatic way to say it as a programmer.
Yeah. I just didn't want to become the pointy haired boss in the Dilbert comic, right? So so this is the situation. It just arose, and I actually looked for a CEO for a long time. I met with a lot of people who came recommended as potential CEO replacements, and it was one of my early investors, the only investor, frankly, who at some point took me aside and said, "Tobi, you will never find anyone who will care about Shopify as much as you do." And so you should just give this a go. And that was pretty scary advice. But I like the challenge. I mean, why do we entrepreneurs do this thing? It's like, why do we even build companies? It's such a silly idea, right? Like, think about how irrational this is. This is not my quote, but like someone said, like you spend 100 hours a week avoiding working 40 hours a week for someone else.
Right.
It kind of makes no sense, right? Like, and with a very, especially tech, like such a minor chance of actually getting any kind of returns on it. And so you don't do this for at least certainly, well, I can only speak for myself. I certainly did not do this for monetary reasons. Reason why I did it is because I thought it sounded amazing not having to answer to anyone, back to our authority problems. And I wanted to make my own sort of technology decisions and these kind of things. And I wanted to see what I can do. I wanted to challenge myself. And I said, this is the right time in my life. I was 24 when I started. This is the right time of my life to give this a go. I will learn a ton. Like, there's no way this could be a failure on a personal level other than in the way that, maybe people lose money. I mean, the failure was a very real thing, but I knew I would learn a lot. And so that I reconnected with Fess and said, okay, there's another challenge to become the business side of a business as well. And I'm going to learn a lot again. And so I traveled to Silicon Valley. It's funny because I found this hostel close to Sand Hill Road where all the VCs were back then. And I bought a bike on Craigslist and just biked to all these things. And they must, when they even see, like, if you look at Sand Hill Road, it's not made for bikes.
It's not made for bikes.
And biking into these like gleaming palaces of capitalism.
I'm just have to imagine they're like, yeah, some guy's coming in from Ottawa, Canada. Ottawa, Canada? And they're like, wait, is that him on the bike?
This is exactly the situation. You're just adding to the picture that's perfectly accurate. And so I talked with them. I learned a lot. I thought they found this somehow I was endearing in some way because I actually did keep contact with a lot of them. They didn't actually run me out of their offices, which also speaks to Silicon Valley. It's an amazing place where you can take meetings with people who will give you their time and advice. And I puzzled it out, right? Like, I figured it out. It turns out I needed to learn a lot about certain terms and so on, but yeah.
Figured it out. And I'd love to talk first an observation, which is how much fun it was for me, and also instructive to meet you when I met you. Right, that is quite a transitionary period in which to meet Tobi. So it's been really, really fantastic to watch as things have evolved over time. That said, part of what makes it interesting is the good decisions, but also the challenges and maybe some of the bad decisions. Can you talk to, in any order you like, some of the good decisions that you made and some of the bad decisions that you made after taking on the role of CEO?
Yeah, it would be good to have some sort of obvious examples here, but I mean, almost every good decision starts somehow bad first, right? There have been we've made almost every mistake in the book, but we are also the kind of company that wants to, in a way. It's been so important to me to build a company that is unafraid of experimentation and where failure, like within Shopify, I think we succeeded in this. We eliminated the talk of the term failure. Like we call it the successful discovery of something that did not work, because I think it really changes people's disposition to it. So, what did we do wrong?
I was just going to say, I mean, I don't want to interrupt your answer, but I think that what you just said could also take us in a pretty interesting direction.
Right.
If you want to buy some time to think about the failures.
Let me buy some time.
Not failures in quotation marks.
Yes.
So there are a number of things that seem paradoxical that I don't think are paradoxical in practice. Maybe they are, but I want you to comment on them, and I just have to find the right quote here. Well, I'll give you the first part. So the first part is a quote of yours, I believe. Your work here needs to make an impact like a crater, right? So it's not just good work, it's not excellent, it's massive cosmic impact. It needs to be visible from outer space. And so people are encouraged to take risks.
Yes.
Now, at the same time, another quote here. Okay, Toby Shannon, right? All right, so this is on, you know what's coming. This is on receiving feedback from Toby. Be prepared to be crushed, says Shopify's Vice President of Revenue, Tobi Shannon. If you can't be crushed, you don't make it on the executive team. You need thick skin. It's not that Toby shouts or treats people meanly. He's simply direct, unfiltered. When he looks at the fruits of someone's labor, he says what he thinks, even if what he thinks is, this is shit. Okay, so how do you combine these two things successfully? One of the things I love about you is that you don't get the sugar-coated kid glove version of Toby's thought. You get Toby's thought. So how do you encourage risks when the feedback you receive at the end might be, that was total shit, you can do better?
Yeah. Now, I want to register that that quote came up in 2015, and since then I have learned that I should translate something like "this is shit" into "is this really the best way we can do this?" But it's it's the same thing in a different form, really. Here's something I've always like a Wikipedia, right? Like there's I hope I get the name right. There's a specific editor from the early days of Wikipedia who I think he had a handle called Crocker, and he declared something called Crocker's rules, which said that he wanted everyone to edit his pages just to make them better, and he didn't want people to apologize for it or try to politically like give him credit or something. He said, I'm going to take 100% responsibility for my own mental state. Like you cannot make me unhappy by just giving me feedback in some way. So just give me the raw feedback without all the like shit sandwich around. And I love that. I would like to run my team on Crocker's rules, because I think it's just there's so much time spent. Like first you have to talk about the weather, and then then you have to say nice sweater. That's a really nice sweater. Exactly. So you have to find something, and then ideally address some very productive character traits. Then talk about the thing you want to talk about, and then figure out some way of afterwards talking about something highly positive again. So that's the sort of standard formula, and I can do it, but I don't think that the highest performing teams in the world should spend time doing this to each other. I think there's a level of progression that comes if you're part of one of the teams. And again, like we are one of the bigger technology companies in the world. Certainly, I think we're the fastest growing SaaS company on the market. So it's not like I don't want to compare too much to sports, because sports is sports, but this is like the big game, right? Like we need to be very good at what we're doing, otherwise we cannot build Shopify. And so I think these things are in the way. And so yes, I want people to be impactful. Like again, if a hard object collides with a soft object, then suddenly like there's no crater to prove it, right? And so I want people to take their sort of mental state in their own hands and just say, okay, I'm going to learn how to be intrinsically reminded that I'm good at what I'm doing and not have to rely on other people constantly telling me. Does
Shopify have any type of training or resources or cultural rules that are explicit that help to facilitate that type of awareness? Because there are people who meditate for 10 years with that objective and never quite get there, right? And you can hire the talent. You can already find the people. Like you could go out and you could hire Jocko Willink, right, to run your HR department. I'm kidding. And
that's a reality TV show.
And you would give them all a copy of Extreme Ownership and be like, all right, here we go. But then there are people who come in who might be exceptional performers, but very sensitive in some way. I run into that quite a bit.
Yeah.
What do you do in a situation like that? Or what are the things that you do or that Shopify does to help people take that ownership of their internal state? Because this is hugely important.
Yeah, it's hugely important. So one thing that's so neat about Shopify is, again, let's get a little bit back to this Ottawa, Canada thing, right? Clearly, as you said, this is off the beaten track of the startup world. Ended up being a phenomenally good place to build a world-class company, but for reasons that were also not clear to me when I started there. A couple of things that happen when you're not in Silicon Valley, right? Or like let's call it a primary like company creation city. Tenure gets longer. Like if I hire someone through this very intricate hiring process that we have, there's sort of an understanding that the chance of us still working together in 10 years is actually really high, right? I mean, it's a commitment from both sides, and the company needs to be worth working for 10 years. That's what I work on day in, day out. But because of that, we can have a very different relationship than in a place where the expected tenure is 18 months. In an 18-month place, I really have to kind of access every good idea and the productive power of, let's say, an engineer or so immediately. They need to be productive.
And they need to be really pampered in some cases.
Well, to even keep them for the 18 months.
That's
because
right. If you have Facebook, Google, and then name 5 other companies who are all pitching the same employees at those 5 companies via headhunters. Yeah.
And so in a place like this, ends up, for better or for worse, in a world where people don't actually go having careers at companies anymore, because the way to have a career is actually jumping between companies. So your new position is always like slightly higher. And so, our cities aren't like that. We assume that we have these long tenure relationships, and therefore Shopify can invest in the people who are part of Shopify in a completely different way. So we have a big amount of, we probably hired all business coaches in Canada and beyond at this point to be full-time employees of Shopify, because we're investing so much in the people. We hire people on future high potential and then try to get them there as fast as possible, because that actually works for us and that works for people and works for Shopify fantastically well. And so we have a lot of these opportunities because of that to make some slight edits to the normal psyche, right? Like, so feedback is a gift. It's such a simple sentence, but really is not the way most people think about feedback, right? And
feedback is a gift.
Feedback is a gift because it is. It clearly is. It's not meant to hurt. It's meant to move things forward, right? Like to demystify something for you. I want frank feedback from everyone, and I get it over. Funny enough, I don't know if you know, like you might have a thought about this. I tend to get it from the Germans at Shopify more frequently than everyone else. So there might be a cultural component in here too. But yeah, so this, like, did you call it crusher of egos or get your ego crushed? That sounds so dramatic.
Yes, be prepared to be crushed. If you can't be crushed, you don't make it on the executive team.
Yeah, I would say that might be a little,
or learn how not to feel crushed.
Yes. So I mean, this is the executive team, which is directly my team of the people who I have the highest requirements of, and we have worked together for the longest. So I think, I don't think it's like this or everywhere in Shopify.
So are there particular books, particular types of training, exercises that are used within Shopify to help people take ownership of their internal state, or to view feedback as a gift that people listening might be able to use or explore or think about in some way?
The companies, we're very, like different companies have different sort of personality trait testing kind of things that they like. Shopify is very partial to a system called Enneagram.
Enneagram. I just had my first Enneagram typing last week.
And you are a 8?
I appear to be a loyal skeptic 6.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, we could get into it. This is all new to me. This is all new to me. But
it's very interesting. Well, the Enneagram it has worked very, very well for us. Like in our internal system, you can actually see the Enneagram of everyone else, and it tells you like how what nuances that means for how to work together, for instance. So that's one. But the other thing, I think, why personality tests are interesting is it doesn't even matter which one it is. After you kind of do one, it already kind of teaches you like, hey, wait a second. The way I'm wired is different from the people around me.
Yeah.
I think this is so fruitful of a discovery, especially early in your career, right? Because again, a lot of the people we hire, like average age of Shopify is 30, 29, I think. We get to people very early in their career, and because the thing that we want to accomplish, and this is really the goal of all of the internal programs, is we want to take people from find out what parts of what kind of areas they have a fixed mindset on, and try to get people to become to acquire a growth mindset, right? Just think of their intelligence as something that can be trained. Think of their skill as a programmer not as something static. And when someone comes and tells you that there's something you could have done better, that's not someone finding out that you're not as good as you thought. That's actually a teacher appearing, right? And once people acquire this growth mindset on at least a number of different traits, usually they arrive to, they make it very, very far, and they can have these 10 years of a career in 1 year on the wall clock. And it's a wonderful kind of thing when it happens.
How would you suggest that people acquire a growth mindset, right? Because there are books, I don't know if Grit, I haven't read Angela Duckworthy's book, Grit. It's been recommended a number of times, but there are a number of books that talk about the importance of growth, fostering growth versus fixed mindset in child rearing. And you shouldn't say, you're so smart. You should say, you worked really hard and did a good job, and so forth. Yeah. Because inevitably, if they have what's perceived to be a failure or make mistakes, it's then not indicative of them being stupid, but rather and something related to effort and or chance that they can play a part in resolving or improving, right? But if we're talking about, let's just say there are any number of people certainly listening to the podcast, and they're like, you know what? Like, I'm sure I have a fixed mindset somewhere, but I don't know if it's a blind spot. I don't know how I would spot it, and then how do I fix it? Mm-hmm. What would your thoughts be?
I think that it's a really, really good question. I wish I had a better answer. I do find that Carol Dweck's original book called Mindset is probably still the best source.
That's DWECK, right? Carol Dweck. Right. Yeah, that was also, we were talking about Josh Waitzkin during lunch, also a book that he's quite a fan of. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of the book. It at least talks you through the theory, and what I've observed is even with very, very high, super successful executives who come to Shopify or have worked at Shopify for a very long time, and they end up reading the book, and they said, you know what, I was actually fixed mindset on all these these three things, and it's like, it really irks me now. It's just really funny the way how it just sort of wakes you up to this to this reality that we kind of all have it. It's not something you can completely overcome, but it's something that just having the awareness is really powerful. And also, if you have direct reports in a company, even if that book does nothing for you, it will allow you to be a much better lead to those people, because it's like just priming you to detect fixed mindset talk in other people and pointing it out is hugely beneficial.
So I want to note an observation that may or may not be true, but it seems to me that the discussion of fixed and growth mindset it pairs quite well with Enneagram also. Mm-hmm. Enneagram, by the way, I was introduced to by Drew of Dropbox.
Oh, yeah.
And I was always skeptical, and I still am somewhat skeptical of certain aspects of Enneagram, which I think actually means 9-pointed. So there are 9 different types. Then there's a lot of discussion of through different books and experts about Enneagram. But like you said, in your commentary about Enneagram, it's not necessarily the specifics of the sort of business acceptable horoscope that you get. It's the fact that you begin to look at relating to other people and your weaknesses and or fixed mindsets differently, right? And so I found it very useful. I had I'm going to have, my girlfriend did her typing, and I'm going to have all of my employees do their typing also, just so they think with an awareness about interactions through that lens. Even if the exact content may be 50% kind of hand wavy, if that makes sense. Yeah,
because here's why all these things matter. I once read that I don't particularly believe in hell, but I like this definition of it. Hell is meeting the best version that you could have become at the end of your life.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the really, really fun things about, an experience like an entrepreneurial journey, like with a company, the careers we have, the books we read, like if they end up being pointed in sort of a direction that allows us to minimize the difference between that person we will meet and the person we are at that point of time, I think that's time well spent. And there's some key, I think, events in one's life that have to go through it. Like at some point, hopefully, you realize that the people around you are very different, that you have some unexplained traits in you, which some of them being becoming big strengths and some of them are weaknesses, and you double down on your strengths and you try to work around your weaknesses, and by the way, later in life it might actually flip which ones is which gets really weird. But that's never one of those kind of things. This sort of awakening to a growth mindset is never one of those life events, I think. And so these events matter because what you're building eventually is like some kind of path that allows you to wake up smarter every day. Then if you do, if you get there, really, really powerful things happen. Suddenly, jumping into like a completely new job that you have no qualification for suddenly doesn't sound scary anymore. I mean, it probably still does a little bit, but the challenge and the thrill of it, of like, this sounds real. I could fail. I now have to grow to make this work. Actually become hugely motivating. And I think that one of the most amazing things that anyone can go through in can do in their lives is to is a variation on the theme of like going on a journey, doing hard things surrounded by friends, right? Company building is one of those things. Often travel is another one. Sports are really good at these kind of things. I would love Jaco's opinion on if war is like that.
I think he would definitely say that.
So, variations on this theme is what you want to prepare for.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier that I think is very, very relevant here. So you talked about, I'm going to try to tie a few different things together. You talked about taking risks and looking for opportunities for massive impact. You also talked about how you have looked at certain opportunities or transitions as opportunities for learning, and that you've made a lot of mistakes, but it seems to me that you've even in some ways optimized for learning. And I just want to highlight for folks listening, and also just to remind myself, that this is something that comes up quite frequently with people who seem to just step up to bat and hit home run after home run. If you really dig under the hood, that's not necessarily the case. But for instance, people who are in any number of different fields, whether it's Scott Adams and Dilbert, or some of the investors I deeply respect, like Mark Andreessen, who's been on the podcast, they talk about combining, rather than trying to be, say, the top 1% in the NBA, which is very hard to do and very attribute dependent. You could be, say, top 10% or even top 25% in things that are rarely combined, right? It could be computer science and law. It could be Warren Buffett, right, in value investing and public speaking. He says the best investment he ever made was in a Dale Carnegie public speaking course because it magnifies everything else that you do. And so there's the combining of skill sets that are rarely combined. And as Scott has also written about quite extensively, and I agree with, that if and I'm paraphrasing here, so I might be mixing and matching a little, but if you optimize for learning new skills and developing new relationships that transcend any one given project, it's really difficult to fail completely, right? And so you end up accumulating these skills and relationships that then help for you to combine these different disciplines in unique ways. So that I just want to mention because it's tempting and debilitating to think that you have to be the absolute best top 1% in X. And when you really look at people, whether it's all the various billionaires and magazine covers or what have you, that's not necessarily the case.
No.
Yeah.
I could not agree more with you. And it's interesting because I almost have two phases to my life in this regard, right? Because I really was trying to become, I don't know if I was trying to become the best programmer in the world, but I certainly was making a bid for it. You know, like my life was completely revolved around writing code, understanding more of it, and then just being very, very good at it. I was going for mastery anyways. And then this situation that happened where, again, I had to like pause that world and have to go into business. And I ended up really, really liking so many aspects of it. I really pivoted to, I would like to, from someone who was going to try to get, I would like to understand 100% of a field to, I want to, as quickly as possible, understand 80% of every field, right? And I like it way better on this side, and I'm eternally thankful for having realized this at some point, because it actually doesn't take that long to. I mean, you wrote an entire book on this, so I'm obviously not trying to convince you on this, but it doesn't take long to understand the first 80% of any number of fields, right? And but of course, you can't understand the 80% of every field. There's too many, so. You'll follow your interests pretty automatically, and then you find out exactly this what you just said, and this is something, you know, sort of it's worth looking into the Shopify universe. The people who are really successful are the people who usually have some multiple skill sets and combine them into some kind of new product. It's like, sort of an obvious example is like boosted boards, right? Like, hey, here's like electrical engineers who also like skateboarding. Let's combine those two things by putting a battery into the skateboards. And so it's really, really, really hard to be the best in the world at a single discipline. But as soon as you start overlaying like 3 different interests, you make Pokemon-inspired jewelry or something, you can make the best Pokemon-inspired jewelry in the world pretty quickly, right? And so
the speed with which you came up with that makes me think that that's a store on Shopify somewhere.
Absolutely, yes.
Because you're in a great position to see, hundreds of thousands of these examples.
We see millions of success stories and attempts at success stories, right? This is honestly the most interesting part of Shopify is really the like we see this, right? Let's actually zoom out for a second here on my entrepreneurship topic, because it's really dear to me, but it's also at a state that a lot of people don't really quite appreciate. Entrepreneurship is in big crisis right now. It's a complete counter narrative to what most people think. But right now, new company formation is at the lowest point it's ever been. Gen X is started a lot less companies, a lot fewer companies than its parents, and millennials are lower yet. So it's the least entrepreneurial generation so far. And the numbers are going, like companies that are All numbers are downwards. Right?
Is that measured by LLC formation, entity formation?
Just general companies that have of all classes in the United States over time. Once you look at the graphs, they're looking like their tank. It's especially since 2005, sort of 2006, the very beginning of financial crisis suddenly fell off a cliff. So why is that? Right?
Tell me, Toby.
Right. I wish I would know. It's like, I know some contributing factors. Like one thing is we just don't need too many copies of everything anymore. Like back in the day, you probably visited, you lived in a smaller community, you visited a big one, you saw, hey, here's like certain kind of hardware store, some kind of, business you've never seen before. You'd say, hey, I might be able to do that back home, and that's a new company, right? Now everything's franchised and like centralized, and it's a lot harder to do these kind of businesses. But the same thing is going on the internet as well, right? The internet is, as much as it can be a democratizing force, it really benefits centralization. We have one social network, it's one search engine, and so on. So it's just harder to start businesses, right? And like you kind of have to clock in the top percentile of a field, or at least an intersection of multiple fields, to even partake in entrepreneurship. And that's, I think that's not good. I mean, if you would give me like, hey, here's like 2 versions of a world, choose one in which entrepreneurship is common and easy and straightforward, and one where it isn't. Who takes the one where it isn't, where it isn't easy, right?
So how would you make it easier, whether in the US or maybe not Canada specific? Could be, but is there anything that you would do to increase the number of entrepreneurs? And why is that important? Is it important?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, which I think should be studied. I mean, like one thing, if you look at this completely from an economics perspective, like if you think that we need to provide employment to people, you should want, like, a couple of mega companies are not going to employ everyone, right? I think everyone understands this. It's we need millions of 10, 20 people companies, SMBs, where that's almost everyone is employed by small businesses, if you look at the actual numbers. So with small business going away, that's definitely a force into the opposite direction. So how would you do it? I mean, one thing is, this is actually a real problem in the United States, but it's actually a problem everywhere, is licensing. Like it's a crazy situation that I can get a laptop and start $15 billion Shopify and not need to ask no one. But if I want to become a hairdresser, I need to get a license for it, right? And I need to go for like, and there's quotas in many places, and you can't because for all these reasons. So that's kind of one of those things which probably people have to have a look at. But the other one is just friction. Like how difficult is it? Like how many things do you have to understand to start an online business? Like you built like a supplement business back in the day. What are all the things you had to learn?
Well, I remember, I mean, this was even before that, when I was taking a stab at a few businesses, all of which self-immolated, but just setting up a merchant account, I remember back in the day was it was a complex and hugely involved task.
I had to post a $30,000 bond to get a merchant account when I started Snowdevil.
Yeah.
That was all the capital I had.
Yeah.
So
it's wild.
So, but those kind of points of friction are everywhere. Like, I mean, this is, I don't want to make this mad, but like Shopify is not the solution to this problem because it's a much more global and bigger problem. But the retail world is one of the most accessible parts of entrepreneurship. And that's really all Shopify is. Like, try to take the learning curve of partaking in like entrepreneurship, building online businesses, and make it as flat as possible so as many people can succeed, right? That's what we've been working on for the last, 14 years now.
Well, I think this might be a good place to chat about the Build a Business competition.
Oh, yes.
The Build a Business competition. We've been talking about just smoothing the path or removing impediments to entrepreneurship, but you also have incentives. Mm-hmm. Incentives are also important. What is the Build a Business competition?
let's go back to where it's come from, because this is, I mean, it's so relevant to I think two of us. Well, certainly to me. I don't know if it's relevant to you, but
to me too.
You were involved. So this was 2009. So at this point, Shopify was completely running on fumes. It's like we were completely, it just, all sorts of things didn't work. Like you asked me earlier, like things that didn't work, like the company kind of didn't work, right? It wasn't, like I had the numbers and people were selling things and it was valuable to them, but there was no real business being built around it. And it kind of all just didn't function. My father-in-law was gracious enough to give me a check every week for running payroll. So at that stage, and he said he would do that for a certain time, and by the end of it, we kind of have to figure out what the heck to do. At this point, we were talking, and the reason why, again, we see the world in a similar way. You wrote 4 work week. What attracted me in this book is like what you were talking about. Just building like a business and then actually doing other things. Well, like this, like I was seeing people doing this on Shopify, but was like, this is an underexplored form of what you can do online. Like people should know about this, that this is what some people do, and we should obviously tell people that that's what people do on Shopify, and Shopify is good for this kind of thing. So we had this conversation. I was at my cottage. I was actually on a boat when we had this conversation, and we're like, how can we overcome this built-in fear of failure that everyone's running around with? Everyone, like so many people, I come to me, come to you, and say, one day I'm going to start my own business. It's like, okay, what about today? Like what's wrong with today? And there's always all these kind of reasons. And I think our working theory was we just should, we need to test this by really incentivizing people. And to which I said, we should we should give away like a MacBook Pro or something like that. And then you did what you always did in our phone calls. It's like Tobi, first of all, that's way too nerdy and only you care about MacBook Pros. And then second, if you want anyone to notice, you need to go like 100x that in terms of price or something like this, which is probably easier to say on your side than on mine.
I also remember exactly where I was, by the way. I was in Glen Park walking down, I think it was Diamond Street past Oshita. I remember the exact block I was on when we were having this conversation. Yeah.
It's funny, yeah? Like sometimes these things are just brand in your mind, because I think we both realized like we were sort of egging each other on to make something big. And what we ended up doing is said, okay, you're going to take the last $100,000 in the bank and just put it up as a competition and say, whoever is going to build the biggest business, like from starting now in the next 6 months, is going to just get the check. Which is, at this point, I said, this is either going to work, and then we'll make the money doing the competition to then give to people, or companies bankrupt anyways, in which case, I'll deal with that in some other way. But we did, and I think through some contact of you, I think you introduced me to Laura. The New York Times ended up talking about it because it was like surprising. It's like tiny startup in Canada putting up something that's beyond like every business plan competition in terms of prize money, right? Yeah. It was a pretty stunning amount.
Yeah, the biggest ever.
It was a huge success. Exactly. You were like super confident that it would be a big success from the beginning. I thank you for this, because I wasn't. I was like, oh my God.
And it's been really awesome to watch also year after year as it has grown and evolved. So I mean, you could give some examples, but from the beginnings, right, we're not entirely sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, on some level, we know where this 100,000 is going to come from, but this is sort of an existential bet in a way. Yeah. But like you said, it's like there are other kind of inherent issues that if we don't do it, it's not clear what the picture is going to look like. And then you flash forward and you're doing these build a business competitions and it's like a high-end reality show in the sense that you have, you know, the mansion from The Great Gatsby with DiCaprio, and the people are flying all over the world, and you have, you know, Tony Robbins coming in to mentor the finalists and so on.
Yeah, and we took everyone to Fiji to his place in Fiji, right? And
just it's been so much fun to watch, and you guys have done a fantastic job of executing, and it's ended up coming full circle also as I'm, you know, considering with the audience that I have, what could I do potentially competition wise? You guys have taken the ball, run with it, and have done this so many years now. I'm like, hey, which lawyers did you guys use? Turns out, by the way, anyone who's thinking about doing something like this, I mean, you have the prize money, but then you have the putting together of a competition of this complexity, which is no joke.
No joke. Every state, even every province in Canada has completely different laws for this. Everyone will come and ask, hey, is this a game of chance here, or is this a game of skill? And which is actually an interesting question for entrepreneurs, because the intellectually honest answer is like chance. I mean, I try to never get confused about this. Like Shopify is enormously successful, but it's like 99% chance, right? Like you can predict all these kind of things which happen to transpire, which led to success. So, but of course, when you're talking to the lawyers, you have to say this is a game of skill. Absolutely, 100% skill involved. And so we launched this in 2010, and we had an amazing winner at the end with Dodo Case, right? It was so cool.
Can you tell people a little bit about that?
Patrick and Craig, two brilliant entrepreneurs from San Francisco who then what they did, I think this was around the launch of an iPad, and so they realized these iPads need cases just like the phones, and so they got together with some traditional bookbinders and made some moleskin looking, like beautiful, like it was really just wood and whatever moleskin is, a case for iPads. And I think they gave sort of flyers to everyone waiting in line around the Apple Store before iPad got launched, so people wrote about it. And they were one of the competitors in the competition. They won it, and fantastic story. There's a later picture of President Obama with his Dodo case, which of course they used very successfully in every one of their marketing campaigns. And I think actually, like, which goes back to sort of the thing that really excites me about the effects that come from all these kind of things. Not just was this an entrepreneurial success story for them, and they got a $100,000 check in the end. They also quadrupled, or even beyond, the amount of professional bookbinders in the San Francisco Bay region. Again, like this was something, like this is an area which had a lot of bookbinding talent when that was an industry, and that's not an industry anymore because it's just not done manually anymore. But they got people out of retirement to come back making these iPad cases, and just a little industry exists there now too. And I think these are just the stories which just I find so great. So
let's talk about. We don't have to get into all the specifics of a ton of them, but I was very curious from the first competition to see, like, what can people do? Mm-hmm. Like, what can people actually do?
In 6 months, right? Yeah, 6 to 8 months. It's nothing.
I mean, but some of these people are creating multi-million-dollar businesses.
Unbelievable.
From ground zero.
Yes.
And so it's been really inspiring to watch, and inspiring not just because of the size, but also the variety. That having been said, one of the things I look forward to every year when you guys are running the Build a Business competitions is what patterns will emerge. Because you begin to spot, and this is much like I feel like with my audience from, say, the 4-Hour Workweek or the podcast, but just the millions of entrepreneurs who allow me to pattern recognize, because I just have the 30,000-foot view on my audience. Show me things that are coming, right? It's like was it William Gibson and Neuromancer said the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So you see these patterns that are sort of this like smoke signal in the distance, and then 5 years later it's everywhere. And with Shopify, for instance, I remember the first year that a number of the category winners, because there are different categories, right? So it's not all or nothing in term at this point in the competition. There are different what would you call it, industries or product categories, which gives more people a chance to win. And it's like, wow, okay, so I'm making this number up, but it's like 3 out of the 6 used Kickstarter. That's interesting. And looking at the different tools and different approaches, different tactics and strategies that seem to be used with great efficacy each year is also something that I have really looked forward to.
And this goes beyond the tools into the approach, I think. And this is actually where I feel like I learned the most from the entrepreneurs. Because these are really the best who are coming. Like, I mean, it's actually, we had first-time entrepreneurs win categories, but like they always had some kind of fantastic insight that they're kind of adding to this exploration about how to build companies in this digital age. So even the Kickstarter folks, one thing, the question I always had is like, was Kickstarter itself valuable, or was it that they had to put a certain video on their website where the founders of a company had to explain why this product needed to exist, right? It seems like such a, like, why does not every product in the world have the inventor declare why they felt this thing needed to be created? Like, why can I only get that from the people who happen to go on Kickstarter, right? Yeah. And most of them ended up figuring out approaches which are really about storytelling. Like, what's the story? Like, the Dodo case story is a story of revitalization of a craft, right? Which people connected with. The beautiful object that came out of it was completely imbued by this story. And if when I was walking around with my Dodo case, like someone would talk about it, I would talk about how this was handmade by real bookbinders, because I owned a part of that story. And that's really the great thing. The really great thing is that things that are powerful and work have actually not changed in the internet age. Like we are all kind of, I mean, our ancestors are the ones who were the storytellers, or at least the people who listened the most to the stories. Sure. This is how language developed, like we're storytelling creatures. And it's, it just is rediscovering this medium after medium is something that is really, really fascinating.
And if you look back to the 2 books you mentioned, right? If you're looking at Influence or you're looking at Andy Grove's book, also not snapshot in time dependent on the technology of right now.
Right.
These are principles. And I've often thought about Kickstarter also and other platforms like it as a talent assessment for some of the basic competencies that one will need in the company they would then subsequently build. Right? It's like, if you cannot sell your product in a video and then marshal resources and try to garner PR, however you take your approach to raise a potentially nominal sum of money for a first manufacturing run, like, how could you ever have the confidence then that you would be able to proceed and build something large over an extended period of time? Like, it's an audition in a sense. And so then it brings up all sorts of other questions. Just getting back to the very first thing, or one of the first things I asked you about, like questioning the question. It's like, is it a survivorship bias? Is it that there are more people attempting things and therefore they can kind of stress test and then run with the things that work? And that is why you have this higher percentage peering in, say, a Shopify Build a Business competition. In any case, it's been such a fun ride, and thanks for having me as part of it.
Well, you kind of started it, so it's like you shouldn't you shouldn't downplay your input on the whole thing. So
yeah, it's and I wanted to also, before I forget, and since I think other people listening might find it of interest, mention a book that's kind of going to segue over to something that may or may not bear fruit. We'll see. But the book that I would recommend, all right, bear with me, guys. This is going to get very Tim Ferriss ADHD for a second, but you mentioned dyslexia. Do you not have any issues with real-time review of code as you're writing it?
No.
Okay, that's interesting.
None.
Yeah. Okay. That's just for another time. I was just like sort of neurologically and optically, that's very interesting to me.
Interesting. It's a fascinating question, but no, I don't.
Okay. All right. So and I just had that come to mind because I'm going to recommend a book, but it's a short book by a reasonably recently deceased Jesuit priest who is also trained as a therapist named Anthony DeMello. The book is called Awareness, and the subtitle is The Perils and Opportunities of Reality, but it's a collection of effectively transcribed talks that were given by Anthony. It was recommended by a guest on this podcast, Peter Maluk, who's in finance. And I decided to pick it up because he said it every time he reads it, and he rereads it more than any other book, it gives him an extended sense of peace. And I was like, that is not the sort of phrase or explanation that I would expect.
It's a hell of a way to sell a book.
Yeah. And I picked it up, and Awareness, The Perils and Opportunities of Reality, I think will you might just find strikes a chord. It's a very easy read, and for me, it did give me this extended sort of afterglow effect of inner peace for about 2 weeks, and I've decided that I'm probably going to reread it less than a month after having finished it.
Wow.
And it's proven very valuable for me, even though I do have a meditation practice, to reinforce sort of through the prefrontal cortex the value of owning your internal state and choosing to be or develop the responsiveness as opposed to reactivity. And this on a sort of macro level makes me think of comfort, discomfort, and how humans relate to that. Something that came up in doing research for this was the concept of, and then I may be barking up the wrong tree here, but we'll see where it goes. The next box and what the box is, not in the shipping container sense. Yeah. Could you talk about what I'm referring to?
Yeah, it's a term from a talk I gave. I was invited to like a local event, and they needed me to do a keynote, and I don't tend to do these kind of things a lot. So, but I kind of wanted. There was something. They just asked me to share something, and so I said, "Well, personal growth is something that I'm, thinking a lot about, and feel like I was going through." So I decided to just sort of explain it the way I see it, without really going deep into the current zeitgeist thinking about it. And so this is sort of what I explained. When you're back in high school, I remember being back in high school, and I remember that there was cool kids and uncool kids, and we probably were two different sides of that kind of divide. I was with the uncool kids.
I was the Dungeons and Dragons nerd kid camp, really? So I actually got my ass kicked up until about 6th grade, and then a growth spurt, and then I was just an angry, rageful vigilante. But up until 6th grade, I was definitely in the nerd camp.
All right. So, and again, I don't know why we keep talking about me as a kid, because it's not that interesting, but it seems to keep coming up. And this is already going to tell you way too much about me as a kid. At some point, I decided, okay, I want to analyze why some kids are cool and why aren't, why I'm not. And what I came back with was the cool kids all had Air Jordans. So I wanted them too, and of course, at some point I got them, and it totally didn't make a difference. But the reason why this is valuable is the high school is sort of it's a universe. It's kind of a box, and it's hard to get in it because it feels very uncomfortable. You don't understand it. You don't understand the social network, the influences. And then you're trying to kind of make sense of it, right, in your own way. And it actually becomes reasonably comfortable then after you sort of explain it to yourself. Now it's a small box, narrow, and your understanding of it is wrong. Like clearly, like mine was about how I could join the cool kids, right? At some point, hopefully, what happens is you find a crack somewhere in the narrow box you're in, and you go into the outer box where this box you just came from is like a tiny parcel in the corner. Like it's a much bigger place, maybe college or so, or work life. But again, it feels super uncomfortable. You arrive in that new box, not understanding physics, not understanding the situation, what's expected of you. It's all ambiguous. You have to reinvent even the things you figured out before are no longer true, and you notice this at sort of an internal level. And the trick is, though, to at some point figure it all out, and then comes the danger part, because it's now comfortable again. And so what you have to do, though, is you have to go and find the crack and go into the next box around this, where suddenly all your college life and all these kind of things just are a small box in a corner somewhere, and suddenly the world's much bigger and you need to learn more and understand more and so on. I find I've met, luckily, at various times in my life, these people who clearly occupied a much larger box, and they just sort of bent down to me to talk to me because they could just somehow, like you said this one thing, and what they said back to you was so clearly right, but you could never have understood yourself based on this vantage point you had, right? And they were usually the way how do you then enter a larger box and so on.
Can you think of any, or are you willing to give any examples of
I mean,
an exchange like that?
I had... it's a recurring thing. It still happens to me to this day. I mean, the specific case I was thinking of back in the days, I left school after 10th grade. I started my apprenticeship as a computer programmer, which is a thing you can do in Germany. And I spent a good deal of time on computers. I understood them, could do programming and so on. But there was a guy who, by the name of Jürgen, who was sort of my designated mentor in this apprenticeship program. And he was one of those people who not just, like I could ask any question, he would have a perfectly, like you could write it down what he said back, it's like everything came back fully formed.
Sam Harris type.
Yeah, exactly. But then also he just created he was just an incredible mentor to meet, because he created these scenarios for me, right? Like he would do my code reviews and so on, but also he would sign us up to drive to some customer which I and him were writing some software for, and then he would just find an excuse for not being able to go and just let me go myself. And I was like 17, 18 years old, right? I just got my driver license.
I'm just trying to imagine having spent a lot of time with you.
I had to get 400 D-Mark, this was before Euro, so it's like 200 euros to buy a suit. From the company. I did not have that money, right? So going to a customer installing software.
Now, why did he do that?
Because he thought I could do it. And that was just it. Like, it's like he thought, he did think that I would probably not fail, and that was good enough odds for him. He also knew the customer well, so he knew that they wouldn't, like he can pull a stunt like this and they would find it funny. So there was very little personal risk for him.
Right.
And then, you do this, and I learned a lot. And of course, my code totally didn't work, and I had to use some satellite uplink to get the new version. And but I came back and said, hey, in this sort of worldview box thing I was in just yesterday, it's implausible that I would have succeeded doing this thing that I just yesterday did. So therefore, I think I'm in an uncomfortable new box right now, and have to relook at everything I know and recategorize everything. And Jürgen kind of just figured out how to get me through a couple of those. And so I don't know if it's a good metaphor for growth, but it's the one that just sort of kind of came to my mind when the first time I was supposed to sort of explain this to people. And what I like about it is that it affirms the thing that makes it hard to grow, because it is the dangerous part of when you feel comfortable in the box you're in. And every one of us has, at the family reunion, the one uncle who decided to not traverse into further boxes way too early, right? They figure they have the entire world figured out, and everything makes sense to them. And of course, everyone else looks at it and says, "Oh my God, what are they talking about?" Right?
So I have a few questions about that. This is a topic of comfort zones. Are a topic of great interest to me, but also it comes back to awareness as well. For instance, do you know what box you are currently in and the next box you want to go to, or is it not possible until you have someone bend down and kind of poke you in the forehead?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I know that I'm in. I know I'm always in a box. I actually am. This is personal. Like personally, I think I have figured out the box I'm in, and I'm currently not seeing the exit, which makes me uneasy.
Wait, what? I'm sorry. Say that one more time. One more time.
I would say that I understand the box I'm in, and I haven't found the exit. And the funny thing is, I've done this so many times that I'm actually really uncomfortable being comfortable. I really dislike not understanding where where growth comes from. So I'm a seeker right now. Are you comfortable sharing what the box is that you're in that you don't know the exit from? I mean, it's sort of it's nothing terribly profound. It's sort of like it's my life, right? It's like I understand how to be a public company CEO, which is a crazy sentence that I never, when 16-year-old Tobi would never have imagined me uttering. But I understand the systems of Wall Street. I understand the company that I've built. I understand how to, I think, be the best leader I can be for the company. I've made a lot of progress sort of in my personal life, just sort of, I started working out and, like all these kind of like just have a meditation practice, all these kind of good things that you've been recommending forever. And I finally came around to. So that's good, but it's comfortable in a way. Like I'm seeking right now. I'm trying to poke at this. I'm trying new things to figure out how to break out of it. How do you choose those things? How do you choose the things that might be the right stress test to find that crack? Usually, books are generally good. Like far field books are useful. I'm really interested in sort of in just psychology right now because there's a lot of more interesting topics than people think. But I'm also challenging myself. Like I'm in a driver development program for motor racing, which is super fun.
That sounds amazing.
It's like, talk about getting in a car, not thinking about anything for like 2 hours, 3 hours. It's like,
yeah, so you are highly incentivized not to think about other things.
Yeah, well, exactly, because there's a real repercussions. This is not like the successful discovery of something that did not work. This was a wall. So, just like doing things that are just different from anything else that's fit, like import things from other people's boxes who are presumably in bigger boxes is a way of doing it.
Now, I would also love your help to clarify something, not so much for me because I think I know the answer, but maybe for people listening, and that's a distinction. I know, as I'm sure you know, many people who think that more money, more X, more Y will make them happy or content or at peace, and they never reach that moving goalpost. And you and I also, I'm sure, have come across, it's more common in Silicon Valley than Ottawa perhaps, but people who have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars and are absolutely miserable.
Right.
And is the feeling very uncomfortable with comfort a symptom of lack of contentment, or is it something else? If that makes sense. In my time with you, you don't strike me as like you are not one of those miserable people. I've seen you with your family. I've seen you with your friends. Like you surround yourself with good people. Like I wouldn't be like, yeah, no, Tobi's an unhappy guy. He's not going to be happy because he's just chasing this ever-growing number, which is definitely not what you're chasing. And I can say that for sure. But is there an aspect of it that makes it hard for you to appreciate where you are currently, or is it different?
I think there is. You're right. I mean, I have an incredible, like I'm the most fortunate person on the planet, I sometimes think, right? Like I have an incredible family of three boys. a wonderful marriage. I'm on one of those journeys at an incredible scale, surrounded by friends. So I have kind of a lot of things going on there, going for me. But I mean, look, I certainly have my demons too, right? Like I do, like I'm pretty serious that I'm going for minimal distance of the person I'm meeting at the end of a life to the person I become. I set very high requirements to me, partly because I know that I was the bottleneck of Shopify for a couple of years, around that sort of 2008, 2009 time period. Right? It was just, I was holding this back, and a lot of my family, friends or so were dependent on this thing working out for all these reasons. And so I just really don't want to get in this situation again. I need to challenge myself intrinsically to be ahead, like to understand what comes next. For better or for worse, if you're running a company and you're sort of a product type CEO, you have to have a pretty good crystal ball about the future and where things are going. And that doesn't need to be always right, but it certainly should be more right than it isn't, because building software takes a while, and if you're building against the now, it's going to be old in 2 years when it's done, right? And so you need to build against the state of the world in 2021, 22, and so on. So I'm chasing like becoming the best version of myself, and that has a lot of good comes from that, but it can also be stressful.
What do you think caused you to be the bottleneck? Could you define what that means to have been the bottleneck, and why do you think that happened? Right? Was it because you didn't know how to hire, you weren't willing to hire, because you, for whatever reason, weren't expanding your skill set fast enough? Like, what did it mean to be the bottleneck? And looking backwards, how do you do the forensic analysis?
I just did not make decisions that I had to quick enough. There was this whole thing about, should I take, is Shopify a lifestyle business or a growth company? I struggled with this so much. And it seems silly now because obviously we can all look at the result of it becoming a growth company at some point. But it was really unclear to me. And so I ran it cash-based, like looking at bank accounts and making decisions based on, hey, I need this amount of money in the bank before I can put $5,000 in Google AdWords and so on. And I just made a lot of decisions way too slow because I just didn't feel comfortable understanding the implications of them. And like I didn't know I was doing this, and I'm really unhappy but I did, and I'm really unhappy that I did. I think I unintentionally slowed down the growth of a company for a period of time so that I could stay on top of it. Once I only realized this after I finally made the call to just say, okay, let's get some venture capital. Once we had extra money and could spend it on all these like marketing campaigns, which we never did, it's like every single one we tried worked. And the company just took off to a degree that is almost comical. Like the VCs are still talking about those times as something they've never seen before. Like I got my Series B, I think 6 or 7 months after the Series A, and they just they wired the money before we even started talking about it. It's like, you need more money. Like you didn't raise enough money, right? Because the numbers were so good. And so I just held it back, and I don't want to do this again.
So why just for people listening, they're going to be like, wait a second, Ferriss, don't gloss over that. So everything worked. Why did everything work? Was it because you were bootstrapped? And I'm not trying to answer the question for you, but was it because you were bootstrapped and therefore all of the focus was on the product for an extended period of time? Was it because of something else? Yeah. Was it because you had a lot of interaction with your customers and therefore knew how to position things so that when you turned them into expensive or more expensive campaigns, you had already honed the material? Why did things work? Yeah,
a little bit of all of those things. Like Shopify, when it came out 2006, was a brilliant solution to the problem of, I need to start an online snowboarding store. And that's it. Like, unless you happened to also want to make a snowboarding store, it was no good. And but I was a customer support on top of everything else. And, here's the kind of interaction that happened all the time. It's like someone would send me an email saying, I cannot imagine, like, you're calling yourself an e-commerce system and you don't even have this feature. And, I'm on the other side of this email and I'm like starting to try to write an essay about why they're wrong. And it's clearly not coming together. So, which then means I spend the entire night, I implement the feature. I deploy it in the morning and I reply with an email saying, actually, what are you talking about? It's right here. So, that on top of also having been a merchant and really understand, like I was and I still am in absolute love with this particular problem. In the same degree, McLean was in love with shipping things. I'm in love with for this type of business, this sort of retail product-based business. I just want to give people a chance to build, like to reach for independence and start something that's meaningful and turns them into an entrepreneur, because I remember what it felt like when I did it. And so we spent years just chipping away at this problem, making it better and better, making Shopify better. It really came together around 2008, 2009. And then the financial crisis kind of just happened and we thought we were dead. But suddenly at this point, it was actually quite good at this point. And it was also really cheap compared to everything else. So people started...
The service itself, Shopify was
$29,
cheaper.
right? It's not like... We had people converting from like $900,000 a year bill to a $59 plan a month, right? Like a month plan. Which of course tells you exactly how good I was at business at this time. But but for us, this was a point of pride, right? We love this, and so we invested everything into the product. Like there was a 20 years in our mind roadmap, which we couldn't get to because we were this tiny team. And so again, in this time frame, the software was really good, but then the people who used it loved it, but it was hard to get the word out. And so, but to test anything, I always had to, like, every time I had $5,000 additional reoccurring a month, I had to make a decision: am I going to hire this one person, which is going to be really good for a product, or am I going to spend this as a test in some kind of marketing capacity? And so what I ended up doing, finally, and that was the right thing to do, is I got the top 5 ideas for marketing ideas. I saved up the $25,000 so I could, divvy that out amongst those ideas. And said, okay, let's try all of them. And because if one of them really accelerates our growth, then we are actually a growth company and we should get venture capital.
And we should know sooner rather than later.
And we should have done sooner, right?
No, I'm saying you do all 5 at once as opposed sequentially, because then you get the feedback.
Exactly.
sooner.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise we don't know, maybe suddenly, it's a reality changed too much. This wasn't still not very scientific, but it was better to do it at the same time, because there were different ideas. It's like radio and AdWords in this way and other campaign in this way. And all 5 worked. It was stunning, honestly. They all worked, and every single one clocked in better than what we expected a highly successful campaign should return. At which point, I took this as an Excel spreadsheet to the venture capitalist and said, here's a formula, I need to fund this formula, right? And then this changed the conversation quite a bit.
They're like, Tobi, I remember when you came here on a bike.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
First come with a bike, when I come with a formula.
As you said earlier, there's a lot of chance involved with a lot of this stuff, but you can, and I wish I could give credit to the writer who came up with this term, and I'm blanking. You may know who this is, but they talk about a luck surface area and increasing your luck surface area so that chance has a higher likelihood of sticking. I know there's a lot of confusion in that sense, but the importance of that hands-on, those customer calls, is sort of, I think, hard to overstate.
Yeah.
Right. And I know some companies that require all of their executive hires to do a period of customer support.
Yep.
So
Same
they get,
for us.
same with you guys. Yeah, on the front lines.
And I still do, I take customer calls. I do periodically. I work with customer support and I have my own account there. I take some tickets and I take the phone and
I love it.
I go visit customers all the time. It's, this is actually like distance to frontline becoming bigger has probably killed more companies than probably many other forces that people would immediately think about when talking about disruption.
Yeah, I love it. So Tobi, I'll ask just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap. We have some dinner and maybe some wine or something else to have later. But you mentioned the crystal ball, and the importance of looking into the future, particularly with the types of products you're developing and the technology that you work with. To go back to my notes, here we go. John Phillips considers it his job to go in Lütke's office once in a while and get him to clear everything off his desk. As CEO, he feels he shouldn't have any actual work to do. We'll kind of gloss over that part. Quote, he has guys to do that, and if he meddles in it, he'll cause a problem, which I like. That's pretty funny. But thinking, you have to be looking ahead. How does, this is just like, it would be a super fantasy of mine. Is it literally clearing stuff off your desk? What does John or other people do to help get you out of the stuff you shouldn't have your hands in?
Yeah. I mean, this has been such a journey, right? Like, I mean, I want to say I like the really high level strategic things, and I like the absolute tiny minute details. Then you are also in the customer tickets, right? The thing that I optimized away is everything between those two. Oh, right. And so that helps a lot because again, these tickets matter, right? I think John has been such a massive help. He's the same person I mentioned earlier who came to me and said, you'll never find someone who's gonna care as much about Shopify as you do, which encouraged me to take the CEO role. So he was there at many important parts of Shopify journey and was full of good advice. And so he helped me sort of build out this practice over time to just hire great people for everything in the middle and allow me to think about the sort of long-term big picture kind of things. And but I really, really, really do like putting my chair in some part with engineers working on some important performance detail and so on. That teaches me something about the company, and it allows me to access the latent pieces of mastery that I once built, which is actually, you were talking about happiness and contentment. Like tapping into some kind of mastery, you just can't. You can't spend all your time just working on things which are going to finish 2-3 years up from now. It just doesn't, like, the feedback loop is too long. It doesn't nourish you in the way that like just doing something that's fun is to do now. So that's a really important component. But lastly, on this crystal ball, I mean, here's the way I think about it. I find that, like, so first of all, the future is not predictable. Like, the future is a random walk and depends on macroeconomic events and climate change and a million other things. So you can't actually know the future. But there are two things you can do. One is really important, which is just draw the trend lines forward, sort of like a minor version of what Ray Kurzweil would do, right? Just like in 2009, we knew that almost all traffic to Shopify would be coming from mobile phones by just looking at data and connecting 2 points and drawing it forward, right? It was kind of predictable. Computers getting faster, AR classes being around and all these kind of things. Like, we should add those into a calendar to say, by then they probably are very important and we should be aware of them. So that's one component. The other, much more interesting component is you need to be a credible witness to reality, and you have to have a model of what, this is currently January 2019. Almost no one in the world knows what January 2019 actually looks like, because of exactly the William Gibson quote you just talked about. The future is already there, it's just not evenly distributed yet. It used to be that you could go to Silicon Valley and what you would see around you, observing the things around you, would be a pretty, like potentially 95% accurate rendition of the most up-to-date current version of the particular time you were in. So if you were an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley and you looked around, you just said, okay, I'm seeing what Uber did with making cars just appear by pushing a button on my magical piece of glass in my pocket. I'm gonna try to disrupt the laundry industry. I'm gonna do it in that way, right? You just by osmosis kind of are aware of what's possible. Now it's much harder. China is a much bigger component, for instance. Like a lot of innovation is coming from China, and a lot of people have not realized that China is completely flipped on its head in terms of it's not just copying ideas from the West, it's actually delivering ideas. Like these fully automated supermarkets that people are talking about and coming to various cities are all over China.
Yeah, the way they use facial recognition to gamify citizen behavior in certain cities, and WeChat, some of the features built into it's and I want to steer away from sort of a moral and political side of China, but like I think just looking at it through just what is life like in China, it's appreciably more futuristic than it is anywhere else. By just they are in a post-credit card world for WeChat Pay and all these kind of things. They have it unlocks completely new business models for them, and so it's worthwhile understanding. But there's other things like who actually in the business world understands the video game industry? It's the biggest industry no one cares about, right? It's like, so. Yeah, I remember one time, I don't want to interrupt, but I will since I've apparently had too much caffeine, which is, I remember one point, I know very little about video games, but I remember I was looking at, because you see it all the time, if you go to, say, Rotten Tomatoes, you see the box office earnings of the biggest movies in the world, right? At least domestically. And then I saw some of the numbers for video game releases. Yeah. And it was a multiple of the entire total of the list. Yeah.
Yeah, the video game industry is a good deal larger than television, music, and Hollywood combined.
It's incredible.
Right? But it's also one of the most competitive environments ever. Like it essentially is a massive industry on the Hollywood model that a hit is everything that everyone aims at. One hit like clears the money from the industry. And so what these guys have found out in the video game industry about just human psyche is fascinating and hugely futuristic compared to what these sort of business people figured out. And so you see, so what I'm getting at is you do the trend line thing, and I think that's table stakes, and people just need to do a good job of doing that. But that's also not that hard. And then you have to look around the planet and just say, where is competitive fields? What tools have the winners figured out in them? How can I import those back into the rest of the world? And I think through the intersection of those two disciplines, you can actually get a crystal ball and make assumptions on the future that start becoming reasonably precise so that they are better than not having them as guiding posts for making product decisions and so on.
Tobi, the Oracle of Ottawa.
That sounds so wrong in a way.
You shouldn't have just said that, because now I'm going to make it my job to make that your next headline.
It's a thing now.
So let's wrap up with a couple of questions that I like to ask and listeners seem to enjoy. I'll just go for some of the hard ones. If you had a billboard, metaphorically speaking, right, to get a message or quote, a question, a word, he's lifted his glasses and scratching his eyes as I'm asking this. So that's his sign.
I know you asked this question. Why was I not?
That's his sign of approval. What might you put on it? Can't be an advertisement.
I mean, I'm going to stay on topic. Entrepreneurship is precious and needs to be celebrated. That's what I would put on the billboard.
On the billboard. Besides the books that you've mentioned, are there any other books that you would put that is one that comes to mind as most frequently gifted or recommended? Doesn't have to be one book. Could be whatever comes to mind.
I mean, the most frequently gifted book is The Elements of Style, because I like good writing.
Now, is that a passive-aggressive thing to employees?
It's super, like, people hate getting that book, but like a lot of, I think I might have 50 copies in my office, so like it happens frequently.
John, by the way, great use on the semicolon. However, here's a gift.
It's more like, hey, I like the content of the memo, but like, I don't think you've written a non-passive sentence in a year. So like, I think we need to talk. So,
not to like stereotype, but that's like the most German thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
We have to talk about your passive voice.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, a book I love giving to people at the exact, like I try to, of course, aim at the right moment is The Guide to Good Life is one of the best books I've ever read.
That's the introduction to Stoicism. William Irving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is.
I think that's the best gateway drug into this world. Let's see.
That is a great book.
I read did you read The Courage to be Disliked?
No, but I love the title.
It is probably the best book I've read in the last couple of years.
Wow.
It's an introduction to Adlerian psychology, which is who's sort of anti-Freud. They were sort of the two factions in the Vienna.
What was the name?
It's called the Courage to be Disliked.
But the psychologist?
I think Alfred Adler is the name. And absolutely fantastic. I mean, clearly a student of Stoicism, but I think he took it further. His concept of the separation of tasks is probably maybe that would be other thing I would put on a billboard, like, but it's hard to put on I think it requires a little bit of context and explanation. So,
what is the separation of tasks?
It's just the basic idea of it's not your task to be liked; it's your task to be likable, and it's someone else's task to like you or not. It's up to them, right?
Yeah.
Just the biggest wedge between your psychology and someone else's that could ever be driven into it. And I think potentially a more tangible way of getting people into this mindset than I think the Stoics, who came at it through a very sort of high-mindedness, right?
Yeah.
Like it all makes sense, but it doesn't, like, I think what Adler does really well is he developed tangible tools to facilitate a lot of this kind of outcomes that the Stoics were sort of reasoning about. So fascinating book.
Courage to be Disliked. That is one of the better titles I've heard in a very, very long time.
Agreed.
Do you have any parting requests, asks for the audience? Last comments that for now you would like to make? Anything you'd like to ask them to do? Suggest that they might check out, or anything at all that you'd like to say?
Yeah, it's a big, broad question. I mean, we didn't really get into this too much. I sort of alluded to it probably enough, though. Like, I'm a huge fan of people just going for it, reaching for independence, being building businesses. I think it's worthwhile for especially your listenership to sort of understand that there's no force in a law of the universe that makes entrepreneurship stick around. It's actually happens because governments and various people made very deliberate choices to facilitate it. Reducing friction massively increases the participation in entrepreneurship. This is not a plug of Shopify. Shopify is a player in the space, but actually we need more companies to figure out ways to reduce the friction of entrepreneurship across the entire spectrum of how people engage in entrepreneurship. Because I think if we don't, this is going to end up being a serious economical issue eventually, because by the time people figure out, like, why is employment going away? Well, small business employment is down. Oh, it's actually because there's small businesses are going down. There's potentially so many systemic effects in play that it's going to be hard to undo a lot of the damage. And so I think it's an underappreciated area of entrepreneurship. It is entirely possible to build a company that's highly valuable by focusing on this. You don't have to go up market like the way everyone tells you to, specifically investor types. And Shopify proves out a way if you're looking for a kind of blueprint. And so I would love for more people to think about this.
When you're going into your Oracle toolkit with the crystal ball and surveying the global landscape, are there any particular countries or cities that you think are worth examining or modeling that do a good job? I don't know if Singapore would be an example.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of Singapore, but it's also like
tiny.
Stockholm is another one. So, what's going on in Berlin is really interesting, but also Shenzhen.
Shenzhen.
It's it. I think visiting Shenzhen would be highly.
And that's Shenzen? Shenzhen?
Zhe, yeah, I think so.
Shenzhen.
This is exactly the kind of thing I have trouble with dyslexia. But
Chinese is pretty hard for everyone who's not Chinese.
Okay, good. But it's just because you go in the world's biggest electronic markets and you realize, hey, if I wake up early enough and make my goal I'm going to build my own cell phone, I can be done by the end of the day by just getting components in this place, right? And these buildings just don't exist anywhere else in the world. And that kind of everything is possible attitude is also shared by everyone there, and it's a really fascinating place. It's really interesting. So I think that's a place which figured it out.
Yeah, that's. That has sort of a silver lining on what could be a very large systemic problem, is that there are exemplars out there. There are cases to study. Tobi, this is so fun. I'm really glad that we ended up having the opportunity to cross paths yet again and sit down. Of course, people can find out more about Shopify at shopify.com. On Twitter, they can say hello to you at Tobi, Tobi. And then Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Of course, Shopify is on all these platforms, and I'll link to everything in the show notes. I also have a Reddit link here, and maybe you can explain what that is. There's a shake of the head.
Shake of the head. No Reddit.
Yes. If you
I don't know how it made it there. I thought it was anonymous on Reddit. This is no good.
Okay. So
new account.
that is not to be mentioned. The name that shall not be spoken. And I'll link to everything we discussed, the books and so on, the principles, philosophers, psychologists, in the show notes at tim.blog/podcast. As per usual, you can just search Shopify or Tobi, Tobi, and everything will pop right up. Tobi, thank you so much.
This was fun.
Yeah, really good time. I've always enjoyed spending time with you. You started off very humble and understated. You remain very humble and understated, which I think is a real testament to you. And I think it is true that companies tend to develop a culture around the personality and attributes of their leaders. And you've assembled a fantastic team and built a wonderful company that's doing a lot of good.
Thank you so much, Tim. And again, kudos to you too. Thank you to you too. You were a big inspiration along the way. You a massive help. Thanks for making yourself available when we needed you. And it was incredibly gratifying to spend that really fun day at the New York Stock Exchange, ringing that bell, being there together. So it's again, it's all about being on a journey surrounded by friends. So thank you so much for being a friend to the company.
My pleasure, and what an honor to have been in the right place at the right time. RailsConf.
We knew.
And it is really important to have companions on the path. So many adventures ahead. And to everybody listening, thank you for tuning in, and try to figure out which box you're in, and check out some of the resources in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number one, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up. in the world of the esoteric as I do, it could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by LegalZoom, which more than 2 million Americans have used to help start their businesses. Past guests even, such as, WordPress lead developer, CEO of Automatic, Matt Mullenweg, now valued at more than $1 billion, have used LegalZoom to help with their business needs, specifically in his case to form his company. But LegalZoom isn't just for launching your business. Their services include everything from helping you to manage changing tax laws, reviewing contracts, creating NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, important stuff, handling lease agreements, and assisting with really any other legal challenge, hurdle, inconvenience that typically takes time and effort away from running your business. The best part is that you won't get charged by the hour because LegalZoom isn't a law firm, so they won't be running the clock up and spinning circles just to raise your bill. Instead, they just ask you to pay one low upfront price for whatever it is that you're looking to get, a la carte style. So visit LegalZoom.com and check out their business section for all of their services. And if you want special savings, that's the terminology in the copy that they suggest. I don't know what the special savings is, folks, but it's titillating. If you want special savings, enter promo code TIM, T-I-M, at checkout, capital T, lowercase I-M. Again, take a peek, LegalZoom.com, and enter promo code TIM. This episode is brought to you by Peloton, which I've been using probably for about a year now. Peloton is a cutting-edge indoor cycling bike that brings live studio classes right into your home. You can also do on-demand, which is what I do. We'll come back to that. So you don't have to worry about fitting classes into a busy schedule or making it to a studio or gym with a hectic or unpredictable commute. I, for instance, have a Peloton bike right in my master bedroom at home, and it's one of the first things I do many mornings. I wake up, I meditate for a bit, then I knock out a short 20-minute ride in my undies, hard to do that at the gym, take a shower, and I'm in higher gear for the rest of the day. It's really convenient and has become something that I look forward to. So you have a lot of options. For one, if you like, you can ride live with thousands of other riders across the country on an interactive leaderboard to keep you motivated. There are also up to 14 new classes added every day with more than 8,000 classes on demand, and you can pick based on length, 45 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, music, hip hop, rock and roll, or say low impact versus high intensity or interval. You can pick the class structure and style that works for you. And in my case, I quite like Matt Wilper's, and I tend to do on demand and listen to a lot of and watch many of the same classes over and over, but I'm kind of promiscuous and also enjoy classes from a lot of the other instructors. They have, Peloton, an amazing roster of incredible instructors in New York City with a whole range of styles and personalities, so you can find what you're in the mood for. You also get real-time metrics that you can use to track your performance over time, and that will help, I would say, catalyze you to beat your personal best. Now that all sounds good, right? Gamification, yada, yada, yada. I didn't think that it would work for me or in any way incentivize me, but they really 100% hit the nail on the head. I was very, very impressed with how motivating it was, and it worked tremendously to keep me pushing, which quite honestly takes a fair amount. I can get quite lazy, particularly with anything that edges on endurance, which is kind of more than 5 reps of anything for me. So check it out. Discover this cutting-edge indoor cycling bike that brings the studio experience right to your home. Peloton is offering listeners of this podcast a limited-time offer. Go to onepeloton.com. That's O-N-E, Peloton, Peloton.com, and enter the code TIM, all caps, at checkout and get $100 off of accessories with your Peloton bike purchase. So get a great workout at home anytime you want. Check it out. Go to onepeloton.com and use the code TIM to get started.